Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of Sunday, December 3rd, 2023. Today we have a fascinating conversation in store for you about how transhumanism is perceived in various online communities and the evolution of online media throughout the years, as well as where we can find some natural alliances. Joining us, we have our distinguished panel of U.S. Transhumanist Party officers and members, including our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer, our 2024 U.S. Vice Presidential Candidate and Director of Community and Citizen Science, Daniel Tweed, our member, Alan Crowley, and our special guest for today is a man I've spoken with twice extensively on his channel. Andreas Xirtus is a popular podcaster with a large following. He is the founder of a historical restoration society known as Tartary Nova, director of the Fediverse, a free software foundation creating tools to protect free speech. And he also has a bit of a scientific background. He has studied nanotechnology and worked as a nanotechnology engineer and microsatellite specialist for NASA. He has also worked as a social media strategist for Turner Entertainment, which owns CNN, and as a content creator at Timcast Media. So he has some experience both in the world of mainstream media as well as in the world of alternative media. I thought he would be an ideal person to explain this landscape to us and provide some insights that might help grow our movement. So, Andreas, welcome. I'd be thrilled to hear some observations from you about how online media have evolved over the years since you started in this realm.
Wow. Well, thanks for having me. And I just want to say I wasn't sure what the dress code was, so I know we don't always have to wear suits. Good to know now, because I see not everyone does it. But I am sitting Indian style on the floor, so I think that's compensating for the amount of formality. I grew up in Santa Cruz, California, which is very close to Silicon Valley. So all of my life I've had access to internet and computers, and I feel like it's interesting to watch as technologies repeat themselves. So I remember using radio chat that was then purchased by Yahoo, and as a kid talking to people in Germany and India, and then that ends up being purchased by some other company, and then Skype happens, and then so just every 5 years, people around the world would start hearing about this technology again, and a new generation of people would think it was the first time, and it would be bigger this time. And it just kept happening, and it was really interesting to watch as people kept going, wow, this is the first time ever that I could see a video on the internet, like remembering real-time transfer protocols with T3 broadband signals existed in the 80s and the 90s, whatever. We had this stuff, like, it was ubiquitous in certain places. So I also feel kind of sometimes like we're from the future because we're seeing things that have already happened, and there's already tests, and you can actually look at places and say, this is what happens if you genetically modify the food, if you have certain kinds of chemicals in the ground. We know now what happens because there's certain kinds of effects that have happened in these areas where that's happened. So there's so much data that we can have that we can use to predict the future that I feel it's very important that we study history, that we own up to history, and that we use that information to build a future that's based on feedback loops. And this is the biggest thing, is we need to learn about how quickly we can change something. a big part of my education in nanotechnology had to do with environmentalism, and so looking at the Aral Sea is something that's like haunting to me. Is in Russia there's this sea, and I always think about it. That's just basically it's disappeared because they diverted this small amount of water from it where the water would rain into because of the feedback loop of the ecosystem. And eventually, over from 1989 to 2014, so not very long, the entire lake just it wasn't able to rain back into itself, so it got smaller until it dried up. So it's made me think more and more about how we need to be very careful about environmentalism, but also how we can do some sort of technogaianism to build a world that uses the wind to spread the seed of the fruits and the flowers and the birds and the bees. It just feels like there's a lot of potential to that technology. And in the social media realm, I would say the things that have really shifted. So when I worked at CNN, they brought me in. They said, like, I said, I don't really. So first thing they asked me was like about how I would get information onto the internet. I forget exactly what the deal was, but I mentioned meta tags, and they'd never heard. I was like, what, meta tags? And my boss at the time, Bert DeBrow, who had made the Jerry Springer Show and a number of big shows, had never heard of meta tags, but he knew that was important. So he had me go to LA, and then I started working for them to try to build their internet system. So, I don't really watch TV. And they're like, yeah, we understand that, but we need your kind of, people. And I thought they meant that they wanted to gear up towards internet, but really what they were trying to do is pull internet people back into the TV. Like, well, that's crazy. Like, that's not a viable solution. So it wasn't really like a great situation. And over a period of time, I would be going back and forth to Atlanta and explaining what was going on, and they were getting more and more upset until finally I kind of said, here's the thing about the internet. Like, you're no longer just 50, 60%, 80% or whatever you think of the channels on TV. Now you're one of the members of the community that make media, and each one of your audience, there's no more audience. You don't even have an audience anymore. What you have are other creators, you have other people that are as equal to you as possible in that system. I mean, that's the way it was, in 2012. Like, still, that was about the end of that period. And so by 2015, I feel like you'd see how many investments had been made purchasing Flipboard and all of these companies, besides Turner, that were putting their efforts into trying to pick up social media. And you can see Disney in YouTube and everything else, but like how CNN even realized, I think the money that was behind CNN started going into YouTube, and the difference in YouTube between 2012 and now is insane. Like, if you could like actually look at it, it used to be that you could watch a video, you could search for a video, you could find a video, you could comment on it, you could react to a video. All of these features are virtually, I don't want to get in trouble for saying this because it's kind of like, are we even allowed to speak about like cyber gulag is paradise, right? So we shouldn't worry, but it is a circumstance that's changed. Now today we live in a world where you cannot very easily find the content you're looking for without looking at other content you don't want to see first. And that's, I think, the beginning of the problems. But the other thing is, if you make something that isn't with the party line now, then you will not be allowed to promote it. And that idea of promotion has become very important because you're just screaming on soapboxes in the street with thousands of people. So promoting becomes like more important because now they're giving you a platform. So the thing is, a platform doesn't exist anymore unless it's this. And so it also, the other biggest difference is when I was a kid, the internet was peer to peer. We'd connect to each other and all the system. And today it's become the intranet, which is very similar to the Soviet Polish network, right? Where everything was on the server and everyone had access to like 20 megabytes or something. They all deserved it, right? But everyone had to come to the center market, the center forum to do that, which is not the Sage network is so valuable because it's a system of interconnected forums of free exchanges of goods, services, ideas. This is why we need to return to some sort of free horizontal internet and media system. I'm sorry if I ranted, but it's a very open-ended question.
Yes, and I think it deserves an open-ended discussion. So I am definitely aligned with you in that I think the pre-social media internet, at least pre-ubiquitous social media internet, was better. in terms of the discoverability of information, in terms of the ability of individuals to be self-directed. And I would say that era ended around 2008, though most people really started feeling it around 2012 or so. And I remember being a content creator around 2007. Actually, that's when I learned about meta tags first, because I was doing some SEO, search engine optimization writing on the side just to earn some additional income during college. And I knew that I had to insert certain tags in articles in order to get them read by search engines. But unlike a lot of SEO writers, I actually wanted my articles to be read by people instead of just being gamed to rise to the top of the search engine results. And so the person who paid me to write the SEO articles actually really appreciated this because I was writing content that people would read. But the meta tags definitely led me to think in a different way, in the sense that one wasn't just creating content for an immediate human reader, one was also cataloging it to be more discoverable by both humans and algorithms. But the algorithms have also changed. So I have been a YouTube video creator since late 2007. And I remember how much easier it was for just an individual content creator to get views on YouTube. I still see that my peak years of views were 2011 and 2012. And some of my content from that time period still does fairly well based on residual momentum, because the YouTube algorithms seem to favor videos that have been popular in the past. But something has happened in the ensuing decade which makes it much more difficult for individual contributors to get that kind of recognition, to get that kind of exposure. It seems now the YouTube algorithms favor very highly professionally produced content that often requires teams to essentially be working behind the scenes. So it is almost like mainstream media, or at least high cost of production media, have taken over YouTube. So I would be interested in your comments on this, as well as whether you as an individual content creator have found ways around that, ways to continue growing an audience despite what seems to be an algorithmic bias against this mode of content creation.
Yeah, I guess the first thought is that it's definitely evolving into a world where better quality content is wanted, but I don't feel like that's the primary like that would be kind of cool, if everybody was making better content, that'd probably be all right. But it is, higher budget will win. It's mostly, though, I think, just rapidity of content. It's the same. It's kind of how Hollywood lost to television, and television saturates everything because you have someone who's willing to produce this. It's a soap opera. You've got the soap company is going to sell this thing. They need an excuse, and so this whole thing happens just so that they can have an excuse to give a free showing. And this is music's doing this. Everything, every content, they're trying to dumb down they're trying to bring down the value of it, right? So people are saying, yeah, why would I pay you for this? And so no one will make it anymore, and that way they can control who makes it. Or if you're making something, you're not going to put a lot of effort into it, right? And people will hear it for a day, but then tomorrow there's a new song. That's the other thing. We're moving on so quickly now that I don't feel like media, for instance, is as valuable as it was before video games. Now video games are a bigger market, and so video games actually are the secret, because they don't have to worry about reviews on television. They don't have to worry about churches. Like, I think a little bit every once in a while it happens, but it's harder to get upset about it. Like with the media, people can critique it and they can access it and they can watch it. So movies got these bad reviews, and now it's just like, oh, dude, it's just a new South Park episode. It's just a new. It happens so fast. It's just a new Timcast episode. It's just every day there's a new, and so no one's gonna remember like 10 years ago what they said on Dr. Drew, if it was woke or not, because it's moving so fast that they don't have to worry about that. That's really, I think, what's scary is that you have to just jump into that, and you have to be making live content all the time. Or yeah, you have to really make something that's valuable. But if you make something that's valuable, that doesn't actually mean that it's going to sell still. So it's not worth it for so many people to put more effort into anything than they have to, right? I think that's the real issue, is reading to a point where people will do as little as possible, as frequently as possible. That might be cool, but it's kind of.
Yes, it does seem like the YouTube algorithm favors very frequent releases of videos, so one almost has to be a full-time YouTuber in order to really get up there in the rankings, which is unfortunate because one of the benefits of YouTube as a platform historically has been getting a variety of perspectives from people with specialized knowledge, specialized expertise. So you might have people discussing history or philosophy or current events from their own vantage points. But to get that expertise, one has to be doing something else other than YouTube videos as well. And
Right.
that is a bit tragic that to get the full benefits of this platform, you have to be on it full time.
Yeah, I think though the point of that is you can build a community. So the answer I would say is, with my channel, I've made it so that there's a community, and I'm really amazed actually, because in the last few weeks I've just gotten hundreds and hundreds of new members, not just subscribers, but people that are actually supporting the channel. And it was an accident because I was just trying to give out content for free. And sometimes I say things or we talk about things which are just a little too future proof, so they're not really welcoming us talking about those things yet. We're a little Galileo, if you get what I'm saying. So then they'll suppress that video and it'll go into the members only section. So now there's all this like too hot for TV content. Not my idea. That's their call. But because that content exists and they've kept it from people, people still want it, and therefore it's created a members only demand. So I think that you will find that if you get a few thousand people even that just really care, and they're all around the world, that's enough. Like, that's actually enough that you can make the amount of videos you want to make, still live your life and do what you need to do. You don't have to ruin your life to become a YouTuber. I see a lot of these people that are like, I spent all this money blowing up this car, and I just go, why? Like, what is this? So, with with your YouTube videos, also, it's going to be more and more AI generated, and I think that's something that I'm doing more and more as well, as I'm using AI generated content. People get so. I had a friend of mine who's not doing podcasts with me because he works in Hollywood and he's on strike. Because it's AI is going to destroy human labor in some respects. But not always. It's like, I'm sorry I didn't commission an artist to draw 394 pictures of Pope Benedict as a samurai, and you know what I mean? Like, there's circumstances where artists will still matter, and made by organic artists will still matter, but it's going to have to change, right? And if we know what TV is and they know what it's become, it's going to become more and more self-generated. And so it's a concern for certain artists who don't see how they can use it, and it's a great thing for anyone who's felt gate kept. It's gatekeepers' worst nightmare is people's capacity to realize their dreams. And so I feel like we're at a really interesting precipice of media entertainment as well, because the barrier is going to be so low to make content that you'll really have to be creative. And that's really interesting, because the most human thing that you can really be is creative. And the last job that, like, I can imagine humans ever doing will be, therefore, some philosophical version of being creative.
Yes, indeed. And I do agree with you that AI content generation can be a tremendous aid to human creativity. I am all in favor of using generative AI tools. Of course, I think a human in the loop is needed for both curation and quality control and making sure that the content really is relevant and not absurd, unless the absurd effect is what one is going for.
That's
But
the
we,
thing. These
yeah,
kids these days, right?
indeed, indeed. We have some interesting viewer feedback. So Daniel Tweet writes, learning from history is indeed the primary feedback loop that must exist to sustain a workable civilization. And on the subject of feedback loops, I do have an essay that I wrote a number of years ago now in 2013 called Feedback Loops and Individual Self-Determination. I would encourage everyone to take a look at that because I have thought about this subject for quite some time. Alan writes, Andreas, you are right. There's a wealth of information on the internet, but also cat videos. And it's interesting. Cat videos have been a fairly stable genre on the
Since
internet.
ancient Egypt. No, but I mean, the other thing is that cat videos are very useful. We forget that AI was trained first on cat videos. What is cat? Is this a cat? Is this not a cat? It's probably one of the most fundamental questions of philosophy. It's not just a Schrodinger problem. It's a future-proof AI problem. So I'm glad that we have those cat videos. It's done some good.
Yes, indeed. Well, I do think cats are an overwhelming net benefit for humanity. So there we are. Alan also writes that the internet aligned with user values rather than corporate values. That would be something. And of course, one of the user values that I think you and I have advocated for consistently is freedom of access to information and freedom
Absolutely.
to discuss ideas. So free speech online has unfortunately been imperiled by algorithmic censorship. It's not even manual human censorship anymore, but humans seem to defer to algorithms quite a bit because it's convenient for the corporations. The corporations don't have to hire as many human moderators. So one of the reasons why my YouTube channel has a warning, and I have to be very circumspect about how I describe this, is because we held a stream with three of our new officers at the time. Jason was one of them, but another of our officers, Zach, was actually presenting a rebuttal to some misinformation about a certain subject. And Zach's rebuttal was more in alignment with mainstream guidance on that subject. However, he mentioned that subject explicitly, perhaps too many times for the algorithm's preferences. And he also showed a graph which he then tried to debunk, but that graph might have been flagged by the algorithm as misinformation as well. So the algorithm was pretty stupid in terms of how it actually flagged the content, which would have been within the official guidelines had a human being looked at it. But then I appealed the deletion, and in a very short amount of time, less than it would have taken a human to review it, my appeal was rejected. So I still
You'd be
have
surprised. It probably went to like a human, and he had like 1,000 reviews, and just was like, I don't care. Like they do it so, and it's tragic. But the other thing is, I don't know if it's necessarily just a corporate, because it's so easy. We really want to dismiss it as a corporate thing, but let's be Slavic about this. Like realistically, this is the first time that oppression and censorship has existed, and it's been de jure. Like this day it means this, tomorrow it doesn't mean that. It's really amazing. Right now they want to cancel Friends, right? Because kids are watching Friends and like, this is not woke. This keeps happening where things are woke today and they're not woke tomorrow, and then maybe they will be in the future. We have no idea where things will be because things are so. This is the other interesting thing about democratization is there's Okay, more information, bigger feedback loop can be dangerous. Facebook, Myanmar, right? Look at Myanmar and what they did that kind of destroyed the border crisis that was happening. There's a million people living as refugees, essentially because Facebook, I mean, can I say that they basically allowed for social media misinformation to proliferate to levels of mass hate crimes. I don't know. I'm just trying to say this as carefully as possible, but I'm pretty sure I can say that much, and it might be worse. And that's just an example. You can look at Egypt, you can look at Syria, you can look at what happened in Madagascar in 2008 with Andre Riolinga, which is one of the greatest examples of an overthrow of corporatism because they leased 200 years of the rainforest to destroy all the forests, and he said no, and the people said no, and they threw out the state-controlled corporations, and then they reassembled their own government. And for years, the United Nations and the British government, they're trying to reject what had happened in Madagascar, but it was so overwhelmingly democratic and it was so clear what was happening because of social media that was happening in the country, they were unable to stop it. So you can see the examples of when Facebook realized they couldn't control what was going on in the country, and later on, when they seemed to really be aware of what's happening, right? They know that this is happening, and yet this is still their practices. So it kind of asks a question like, is this really just corporatism, or are there actually reasons why people that are in revolving doors between government and other corporations, the international corporations, are doing this? I mean, it seems like they're actually manipulating in certain circumstances government media policies for social media on purpose, and it's amazing because this is happening not just in Myanmar. We're seeing it happen in the United States. People are also kind of provoked into doing this to themselves. They say, oh, I don't want to see this, or I do want to see this. First off, they groom what you're allowed to see on YouTube so much that you barely see what you want to see anyway. You only kind of, maybe if you're really fanatical, will be able to latch on to somebody and hold tight and hope they don't unsubscribe you over and over again if they don't like that content. But if you finally have your echo chamber, you're in that echo chamber. Now you can't see what's outside of it, and you're shocked at the world, which is it's incredible to see so many people that are more shocked today at other people's realities than ever before. I mean, the thing is, again, Gennady grew up with me, internet era, talking to people all around the world. We are unified. We were in the whole world was one for a little while. It feels like that. And today, with this same internet, we've created echo chambers which have isolated us more than we were in the 60s. I can't believe it's possible. So I don't know. It does feel like we do have the opportunity to use that social media better, but it's going to take kind of acknowledging that these systems of control are not just maybe they're accidental, but I really don't know. And we should ought to consider who's benefiting so much from the societal control.
Indeed. I think it is troubling that really, in terms of actual abuses on social media, the social media companies don't seem to crack down at all. I have seen a lot of trolling, cyberbullying, genuinely hateful rhetoric, incitement to violence that the social media companies do very little about. It seems like, as with a lot of censorship regimes, they go after the easy targets. They go after people who might have committed a faux pas here or there, or just tripped on an algorithmic trigger of some sort. And as a result, they get banned. But people who really do use social media for nefarious purposes are often allowed to stay on. So that is indeed tragic. Now, I do share this observation that the early internet was a place where it seemed like we could communicate across these divides of political orientation or philosophical or religious views or culture, and actually find out what other people thought, actually get access to information that seemed to be quite unfettered. And that changed when the prevailing mode of consuming information shifted to these walled gardens of social media with algorithmic feeds, with filter bubbles, echo chambers. I had an essay in 2008 called Liberation by Internet: How Technology Destroys Tyranny. I will share that essay in the chat. And this essay was quite optimistic. It suggested that because of the ready availability of information, much of which can still be accessed for free online, it would be possible for individuals to educate themselves, to learn what is true, and thereby be resistant to censorship, to oppression by various governments, and essentially seek out the logically best path for human beings to coexist and flourish. But that hasn't happened very clearly. And I wonder what can be done to set humankind onto that path in actuality. The free availability of large amounts of information doesn't seem to be sufficient. What else do you think is necessary?
I mean, so maybe it has to do with selling of information. Like it's kind of Bernaysian. There's a level where there's PR that's happening that's making people want to buy poison and drink it, right? That's crazy. But we're living in that world. That's the world we live in, and people want to buy poison and drink it. So we need to figure out how we get people to stop believing in hypnosis, or we need to help people register that they're being hypnotized and be like, hey, like, you like that song, right? The song makes you want to drink that soda pop, doesn't it? Like, just help people become aware a little bit. I think that would be probably a big part of what's going on, is that people are triggered so easily, and they think they're triggered for negative things only, and they're aware of that, but they're not aware that they're also triggered for these irrational, positive, sort of Tavistockian vices which are destroying themselves. I think that's a big part of it. Also, the internet itself is, it's totally capable of turning back into that. Like, people can use it for that purpose. It's just that the options are there now for you not to do that. And I think that's the thing, is if there's people constantly purchasing the other option because it's better advertised. I think that's really what it is.
Indeed, indeed. And it seems that, yes, it's possible to return to that. Alan has an idea aggregating social media channels from various sources: Christians, Democrats, Republicans, American Catholics, even racists and Muslims. At least one would know what one is tuning into. So that's interesting. I would hope transhumanists would
I would
be
do the
on
opposite,
there.
yeah. Well, do you mean aggregate? Okay, so what I would do is I would take all, and this is what I think is interesting. Have you seen what Reddit's doing? So Reddit basically stopped caring about humans, but they have all this data from all these humans, and so there's these companies that want that data so they can train models, and so they have all of these little niches of people that are specific. They only want you to talk about this. They want you to be autistically obsessed with that, this and this and that. So that kind of information now is curiarchical. You've got very different kinds of information that they can aggregate and they can study. But I think we as a people should probably try to integrate shadow more than be afraid of difference or something like that. Because the real answer is to reunite all of these smaller minorities that they've used to keep us from having self-determination. This is weaponization of democracy, right? Because you have a majority oppression of any self-determinate minority. Well, then unite the minorities, integrate into a group that is the majority, right? That's the only way that you can win in a democracy. So I don't know. It's funny because some people are like, oh, the Republicans or the Democrats. Like, no, really, like, you should just kind of explain to them how they believe in the same thing. Like traditionals, like people are the traditionalists or trad or whatever. This is our tradition. This is your tradition. Your tradition is you like to try to live as long as possible. We're like that too. We're even more about that. It's every little thing that people think is so different isn't really that different. And a lot of the time, the differences are because we're doing things from different angles to get the same thing. So I don't know, like, all this idea that we're that different, I think it's also really a thing of explaining to people. And they're coming to us. Like, we're not even moving that fast because we're trying to not move that fast. We're already in the future waiting for the technology to catch up with where we have our ideals. And so other people are coming to that conclusion as well. And I think that's really interesting to see, like Democrats like Andrew Yang harping really legitimate points that were made a couple of years before he talked about them on your podcast. I think that's really the way to do it. Like, we should have people echoing what we're talking about a few years later in the mainstream. And what's better than being famous? Enigmatic. Right? So don't worry about not being famous right now, because the more important thing, I think you also said this, was that it's not necessarily about changing the election. It's about pivoting consciousness, right? It's about pivoting consciousness. And I think that is a bigger deal, because the things that they're voting on right now aren't even relevant to the solutions yet. So really, we need to be talking more about the philosophical reasons why we all agree on it's time to come up with solutions instead of just bickering over, this is the other problem with the democracy. It's supposed to be well informed, right? And since we're working on misinformation, it makes it very difficult because no one's trying to build actual solutions, right? So AI is very interesting because aggregating, like you say, aggregating all that data, then we can see, oh, this is what these people need. This is what they're worried about. We could probably come up with a solution that no one person would have thought of that solves most people's needs and desires. I think that's also the future.
Yes, indeed. And I do think it is worthwhile to try to find common ground with people, essentially, if a lot of the manipulation of public opinion is being performed by a media establishment. There are many different communities and groups that are essentially counter-establishment that could be our allies in terms of breaking through attempts at monopolizing the content that people get, or at least directing people into these bubbles where they're less effective. Now, we have some interesting comments as well. So Daniel Tweed writes, the problem is that most mass hypnosis techniques must be seen through to be disbelieved. So we have to actually recognize that this is happening. And Daniel Tweed writes, maybe we need and will create AI assistants to help us find what we need to connect with that we are missing out on. And that is contrary to entities trying to connect us with content that we don't necessarily want. So I think a lot of the algorithms that are deployed by social media platforms, they want to kind of suck us into some sort of rabbit hole where there are ulterior motives being served. And this is not particularly controversial. Those could be the ulterior motives of advertisers, whoever is paying for that content, or just the ulterior motive of keeping somebody engaged on that particular platform rather than what the individual would prefer to do, which would be to use that platform instrumentally and indeed as efficiently as possible. So if I want to find content, I don't want to be bombarded with tens of pieces of unrelated content, even if I might find it interesting, even if I might think, oh, this is something that I actually want to look into. But right now I have objectives X, Y, and Z, and I want to accomplish those objectives. I want something that would help me do that. So perhaps AI assistants that are controlled by individuals could help essentially structure a person's feed to give that person what they want for the fulfillment of their stated objectives, rather than to suck them into some tangent, for instance. Now, Alan asks, how do we accentuate the democratizing aspect of social media while minimizing the algorithmic ghettoization and isolation? So this is a similar line of thought, because we do want more people to participate. We do want the internet to be a way to connect people. And to a great extent, it has done that. We are all here having this conversation. because of the internet. But we want to make sure that it remains this open means of accessing the world for our benefit and not these ulterior types of benefits. So, how would you answer Ellen's question?
I think it's all about goals. If you had the goal to make the application to do that, so in the old days, they used to make the goal to have a worldwide chat app room, right? Like Excite had a chat rooms in the 90s that you were a little avatar figure and you could have anyone from all around the world. This was the goal, and so it was built into the reality. And now they've, like they said, they have ghettoization, I think is actually a pretty decent term. They're trying to figure out how to put people into smaller servers, niche together. This is maybe reflective of human nature, but I don't know. I think it's urbanization does this to humans. Sort of like the idea of the sloth. You know that sloths don't really sleep all the time? I found this out. I thought sloths sleep like 18 hours a day. They do if you put them in a cage alone. That's apparently not fun for them. But if you watch them in nature, they have regular sleeping pattern. So in depression, in a cave, right? Like this is kind of humans in an urbanization. Sure, like they don't leave as much. I get it. Like they try to figure out how to psychologically deal with not leaving as much. But is that natural? I feel like humans are really kind of nomadic and like to walk thousands of miles. You know, this is the kind of species that doesn't just run a little bit. Like we walk and hunt for like thousands of miles. So it seems more like in nature humans would like to spend more time as xenophiles, seeing different things, meeting new people. When you were on the internet, I think that was an interesting thing. Wow, you're in India? Like amazing. You know, like I was excited about it. So these days people don't like that a lot. And I wonder if it's maybe consequential of being saturated with too many people, or just that the system itself is designed saying, hey, you don't have to talk to everybody. Like kids don't like that their parents see them on Facebook, that everybody sees everybody. They like to have their private, conversations with the 5 girls or 5 boys that they're secretly seeing when they're 12 to 18 or 19. These Zoomers are worse than anything we ever came up with. I'm just saying. So like they have a lot more secrets and they don't want everything to be transparent. So that might be another reason why we're not seeing this, because people aren't ready to be honest. I think that'll be huge. But the next one would be probably just to design the app with that purpose. And there's been a few examples of it, and they always kind of disappear. Like you've got these, chat roulette kind of things, but they turn into nightmares. And they really don't have to, right? Because if you have like a tracked account, you can make sure that people aren't able to do horrible things. And you could just have people that meet all around the world for the purpose of that. But instead, yes, I think there's probably benefit to ghettoization, to these corporations, and to anybody who's interested in information, right? Intelligence. Because you can see how quickly something gets to people, how slowly some information gets to people, whom gets that meme a week from now, a year from now, an hour from now, when mom sees it, why mom sees it versus when Sally sees it. I think that's probably really interesting to them as well. Like when people get that information and why they don't get it at the same time, it's probably something else that they were studying. So I think that's another thing. And a big thing is Facebook, every corporation has a 5-year plan. Most of these companies were planning on like, okay, well, after 5 years, it probably won't exist anymore, right? It's all going to change. So what we'll do is we'll study this, we'll game this, we'll have a bunch of data. Facebook has so many years, decade or more of data on 20 years? God, like on not just you, but as you've changed, right? Timelines of people, which is really interesting because it knows how people change over time, which is going to give you a whole new kind of algorithm than just a person, right? Something that grows like a sim. So that's really valuable data for them. But the point is, we're now at a point where I think media is we're about to collapse into you typing what you want to see and it being created, right? It might start out as millions of people watching it or hundreds of thousands of people watching it, and then their super chats will be what for a minute is what's on the screen. But what's going to come very quickly is it'll be individual one-on-one, like THX 1138, just made for you content. That's where we're going. It's going to be there very soon. I mean, that already exists for me, in personal life, like form, essentially. I can do that with a video card. So I can only imagine how quickly that's going to be sold to people, right? And I think that's going to be the end of reruns in a lot of ways, because we're seeing generative paintings and generative, music, and the next thing is going to be just nonstop streaming content that you ask for.
Yes, that would be fascinating indeed. I have already spent quite a bit of time creating AI generated art, and I know you have experimented with AI generated music, and Jason has as well. And I can see much greater potential there. On the other hand, there's also still the need to be connected to the external reality and figure out how to use these tools, not to kind of get trapped within one's own world, so to speak, even if it's assisted by these technologies, but to use them in a way to still communicate with others and solve problems in the external reality that affect us all. And we have some interesting feedback as well on the subject. Alan points out the famous quotation from William Gibson, the author of Neuromancer: "The future is already here. It's simply not evenly distributed." And certainly with a lot of these online technologies, that is the case, even though the technologies are either very cheap or free. ChatGPT is free. DALL-E 3 is free if you know how to
Gratis.
use it. Yes.
Gratis. I like to be sure to say free as in speech, not as in beer. Just, I still believe in that Richard Stallman ethos. Like, stable GPT is out, and stable diffusion is out, and stable versions of this technology is out. I'm a big supporter of AI, even open AI. I love Sam Altman. I love what they're doing. Even though I was really scared, it's like, oh God, an open source charity turning into a corporation. But even then, I kind of knew, like, this is the only way you're going to be able to afford not just to pay the programmers, the lawyers you're going to need to defend yourself if you're building this thing. And yeah, that technology is, as I hoped, making its way into free, open source, free software. And that's fundamentally the most important thing, is that this technology makes its way into transparent code that anyone can read. It needs to be free as in speech, because then it becomes integrated into the human condition, human experience, human civilization. And it's not just the property of one state, one corporation, one group of people. It becomes part of us. I think that's really what people need to have in order to know that it's truly safe, right? Like, that's the only way. Like, until then, and until then, yeah, we are going to have people that are wondering about ChatGPT, because, oh yeah, we're allowed to use these things, which are going to put people out of work. But they're being very careful about, very easily, this software should be able to remove any job, replace any job, not just these menial jobs, but the most menial jobs, CEOs, right? CEOs should be the first thing to go. I think that's why they tried to get rid of Sam Altman. That's why the OpenAI had all these problems, because they started to recognize that the first thing to save them money would be getting rid of all of these most useless jobs first. And then they probably would be able to support having people have enough money to living wages.
Interesting. And yes, I do think that the economy will evolve. I do see humans as having certain kinds of both executive judgment abilities as well as recognition of purpose and intentionality that would be very difficult for at least current level AIs to replicate, because, say, a large language model or an image generation model, it's based on correlation with millions of excerpts of text or images that it has seen, but it still doesn't understand purpose. Like, what is the purpose of a window? It might be able to give you a text on that, but if you ask it to draw a window, it will often draw it asymmetrically or with some strange elements that aren't exactly decorative. They're just like fragments of things that it has seen, which wouldn't make sense when put together. I've seen situations like that because I have generated many cityscapes using various AI programs. And to get it to have purpose and intentionality, that kind of understanding, I think is still going to take a while. So humans still play an important role in this regard, but the AI can definitely automate a lot of the repetitive tasks. And the AI can also recombine elements very creatively, which can assist in recognizing new possibilities. Now, I also wanted to bring up some comments from Ashmole Productions when we were discussing essentially the goal of connecting people or getting people to interact with those who are different. He says this was the stated goal of intersectionalism. It, in fact, achieved the opposite. Many of the groups have views that are diametrically opposed to one another. While this connection is not impossible, there are problems, and he says great care needs to be taken in the path you speak of. So I think what he's saying is that this type of open connectivity also creates more of a potential for conflict if people do come across irreconcilable clashes of values, whereas before that would have been remedied to some extent just by the fact that these individuals or groups would have been further apart. So, say in the 18th century, if somebody were living in colonial America or in the new United States, they usually would not have come into any contact with Islamic fundamentalism unless they were on the seas near Tripoli and their ship was hijacked by the Barbary pirates. But unless they were of like an extreme minority demographic for Americans, they would not have had any contact with that. So the American set of ideals and institutions evolve without having to clash with the Islamic fundamentalists. And
But that's like the worst. So here's the reason why that's the worst thing, right? So imagine you grow up as like, and you're raised by, so I was raised by Jesuit Catholics, okay? And so I've met other Catholics who are very different than me. I thought all Catholics believed in Teilhard Chardin, New Sphere, Omega Point, transhumanism, metaphysics. I thought that was just part of the religion. You understand? Then I meet other people like, oh, you're a Jesuit? That's horrifying, because they think that we're like not Catholics. Like, well, really, it sounds like you're not Catholic. So all of a sudden, you've got this new frame of information, which it gives you Paris syndrome, and it breaks every kind of. So then you meet Westboro Baptists, and you're like, oh wait, Christians that are the same as they're the same as the fundamentalist, violent Muslims, particularly like Taliban or something like that. It seems like they're the same thing. So there's people that are so similar, and I think that's kind of interesting when you get to a point where you can't use if statements as easily. Like AI, really narrow AIs are great because they can know where a missile is. Like, is this Turkey? Is this, Israel? Is this Palestine? Oh, yeah, I'm sure of it. But if you have so much information, you're like, is this Palestine? Well, it could be a cat. I know so many things that it might not be. And that's the problem with too much information. But it also means that you're less likely to think, oh, well, these people, they're all else. It's like I and thou, and like this is just unanimity -1, and you ain't it. Like, I think that's a kind of a reason why we are benefited from oversaturation of diversity of phenomenon and information. Because eventually, admittedly, you're kind of numb to the shock, but that might not be the worst thing. Because so many people are so shocked all the time. They're just so upset all the time. I don't know. It seems like those are associated.
Yes. And I would point out that the lack of exposure to other people, other groups, and their ways of thinking could lead to some terrible misunderstandings and has done so throughout history. So, for instance, one of the most significant results of the Crusades was in 1204, the sacking of a Christian city, Constantinople, where the Crusaders committed a lot of destruction and looting, and they were supposed to go to Palestine to fight the alleged infidels, and they stopped along the way to loot the world's largest Christian city, and they decided to stay there for essentially 56 57 odd years in something that was colloquially known as the Latin Empire, so they never got to Palestine. But it was because I think they saw sufficient difference between themselves and the Eastern Roman Empire, and they didn't have enough knowledge, enough context to realize, oh, we're actually supposed to be of the same religion here. We're supposed to have the same values. So these kinds of just massive tragedies, I think, are greatly enabled by ignorance. Now, I do wonder what you think about natural alliances for transhumanists in the course of your observation of various groups, various communities online. Are there groups that actually would be quite aligned with us in terms of our values, but they might have just a different history of associations or a slightly different language in which they couch those aspirations, or just they may be kind of focused on their own networks and we're focused on our networks, so there might not have been as much crossover yet. What do you think about that?
It's difficult to say. So part of the reason why transhumanism is so interesting is because it is so open-ended, and I think that the focus on life extension or anti-aging, those are actually surprisingly divisive in a strange way. They're very important, they're very uniting, but at the end of the day, when people start to think about it, it makes them question the way things have always worked that they've always seen. And it's scary to say, wait, you mean I would buy... It's kind of like buying an electric car for the first time. You're like, wait, I could not die of diabetes and dementia and like have all these problems? That's a possibility. I think that really weirds people out, and they wonder, is it healthy to want to not die? Which is their thought. There's a difference between saying I'll live forever, obviously, but they think it means you'll live forever. And so it makes it hard for people that don't understand really how simple transhumanism really is. The idea that you want to prevent age-related diseases, you want to encourage technology. I think when you really get down to it, it's really hard to find a group that wouldn't be in alliance with the tenets of transhumanism. Like the NRA, right? They use tools. At the point that you're using a gun, aren't you kind of a transhumanist? You're not a normal hunter. You're not an eagle. You're not a bear. Like at a certain point when you're using a hammer, like you kind of have to recognize, maybe like any union like that would be using tools should see how you're more of a person when you can do more labor with your tool. I mean, there's just so many reasons why it sounds too sci-fi. It sounds more sci-fi than it is. Right? It's becoming less and less that way because we're literally living in the future now. So everything is possible, and we're making all these technological marvels in front of people. And they're like, oh, okay, we live in a magic world. But it used to seem like we were talking about the Matrix to say, yeah, I would like to stop aging. I think that's the thing that's going to be the hardest one for most people, is the idea that they can actually make real changes in the world. But when people start to see that that's what's possible, I think that then you've got the Green Party, then you've got anybody who's the technogynists, people that are really interested in how the world will eventually become a living system, or that it already is, and that we can be integrating our technology into that so that we're having no entropy. I mean, those kinds of thoughts really do jive with transhumanism as well, because the better the world, the easier it is for humans to live in it. And so I think that we'll find that there's a lot of crossover in environmentalism with transhumanism. And there has to be, because the other way around is people are going to say it's overpopulation. So we're going to need to deal with it from an environmentalist perspective anyway, to say that it's good for humanity to have a better world. It's good for the world to have a better humanity, right? I think that that's a major thing too. But there's no reason why there can't be just associations every direction, right? Like anybody who's interested in technology, anybody who's interested in religion. I'm really interested in the Mormon transhumanists, because it's fascinating that they're trying to establish their religion's all about establishing Zion on earth, right? Making earth as heavenly as possible, right? So transhumanism's the natural progression. And so it's really, to me, very interesting to see where transhumanism fits in, because the idea of bettering man, bettering humanity, bettering civilization, leaving more for the next generation, that feedback loop, that really plays into pretty much any philosophy that is worth its weight I can think of. So there's not a lot of places where transhumanism is really antithetical to your lifestyle. I feel like if you were really even the idea of like an honorable life, that's the other part of it. People think that it's just about life extension. They're not seeing that it's about making life more, have more dignity, have more freedom. You can right now print as much money as you can conceive of, but you can't print more life. You can't print more time of your life, and you're trading your hours of your life for money that is just not real. So we need to turn that around, I think. We need to use that money that isn't real to create more life. And I think that's a big reason why transhumanism isn't really like even the right word for it. It might just be results or efficient choice of change. I haven't really thought of a term for this, but it's a bigger thing because almost every other idea hasn't ever succeeded. We're always like, oh, well, communism hasn't ever been tried yet, really, or capitalism isn't really happening 'cause it's not like the Native Americans did it, but this idea of actually making real changes, we're seeing that with technology. So it's just efficiency of results through technology, right? I think that's what we've always done. And so by saying transhumanism to people, they think it's more a new, different. We've always used hammers. We've always used technology. We've always been. This is who we are. This is what humanity is. We're a phenomenon. We use tools. We need to accept that, and we need to work with that, and we need to make the best choices possible to change the world with those tools.
Indeed, and Alan writes, "You might be a transhumanist if you use tools to survive."
Based.
Now, it is a challenge sometimes to get people to recognize this is the essence of transhumanism. Daniel writes that he usually sums up transhumanism for people by explaining it as reducing suffering through technology. And we do try to emphasize, as Jason writes, that the future of technology is sustainable and technology can solve a lot of the problems that people perceive, for instance, from an environmental standpoint. But Mike Lezine also points out deathism is deeply ingrained, like racism and some other malevolent isms.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think this may pertain to the observation that the future is unevenly distributed. For a lot of people, the prospect of indefinite life extension, indefinite, healthy, youthful existence seems still to be science fiction, even though the potential of the technology is very close. Aubrey de Grey has stated within 12 to 15 years, there's a 50% probability of longevity escape velocity being reached. That means essentially enough for everybody watching this video, unless you are on death's door. And this should give a lot of people hope, but a lot of people haven't been exposed to that message. So I think their initial reaction is this is unattainable for them. Yeah. And so they might say, oh, it'll lead to overpopulation, or it will only be for the rich, or people will get bored.
Only Jeff Bezos will live forever, yeah. Last man standing.
These are defense mechanisms for them. They want to put it out of their minds as something ridiculous because they don't want to face the possibility that this might happen, but it's contingent, and they might have to live their lives differently. They might have to do something different in order to see that kind of future. So it's a matter, I think, of getting people from this state where they excuse away that line of thinking and toward a state where they're actually motivated to take action about it. Whatever they think that future will look like. If they think, oh, it's attainable, but it might only be for the rich, and we want it to be for everyone, what actions will they take to make sure that it is for everyone? I think that's a more productive way of thinking than to just say, oh, no, it's bad, it's undesirable, because it will only be for the rich.
Yeah,
So
I think that it also is a healthy form of skepticism, though, because we do need people to say, like, I was very skeptical, as I said, when OpenAI went to become a private company. I think that we need to have skepticism so that people make the result, say, could this horrible thing happen? Could it happen that this technology, this is magic, right? Would Arthur C. Clarke say that any science that is indistinguishable from magic? I forget what the reason is, but yeah, that's basically what it is that it's magic now, and they're accepting magic exists. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right? So most people will believe that this is going to exist. Like, yeah, sure, we live in that world now, but if not everyone has access to that information, it is a very dangerous situation now. So we do want open sourcing of all of this information. We do want free technology. We want transparency. We want a glassnose of data and information. I think that's really important. And people should be afraid of that information not being made public, because information being kept in the hands of a few has led to a lot of problems in history. And I find it really interesting that we're at this point where people are so worried about quantum computers ending encryption, right? We're about to hit a point where it'd be almost impossible to have any form of privacy. And that's not, people are really, afraid of that, but I think that's maybe because people, I don't know. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about a world very soon where it's impossible to get away with, you're constantly accountable for your actions? How do you feel about a world like that?
well, I think there is a difference between information about, say, a person's views or abstract outlooks or preferences, and specific information about, say, personal assets. I wouldn't want complete transparency of my bank account. Likewise, I think there are spheres of privacy in everyday life which should not be infringed upon just because, say, if you wake up and you go to eat breakfast in your house, you wouldn't want to find half the world at your breakfast table looking at you
Right. But
eating breakfast.
do you think it's possible? Like, in the future, will privacy even be possible?
I think it definitely would be possible mediated through technology. We just have to find different means of protecting it and a different balance of, let's say, defensive versus offensive technologies. So we as individuals should have control over our data. And when we go into an online sphere, we should have the prior ability to say, well, we want the following information about us to be shared, but we don't want this other set of information to be shared. And it could be, for instance, we want information about our views in terms of our outlooks, or our views of cat videos, even to be shared. But we don't want information about, say, what we ate for breakfast or our financial information to be shared. So that, I think, is a distinction that each individual needs to be empowered to make, and different individuals will make different decisions. So some individuals will say, no, my cat videos are entirely private. Other individuals might be a bit more permissive in this regard. So Mike Lazine has an interesting comment on this as well. He says he thinks privacy in the future may be a matter of opting in and out. Those who opt in may be tempted to do so by certain perks. Yes, so people, if they relinquish some aspect of their privacy, then they should be rewarded for that. Right now, the social media companies harvest our data, and the only thing they give us in return is the ability to use their service. I think we need to get a bit more. I think if certain kinds of data about us are being disclosed without our explicit knowledge and consent, at least there should be some sort of micropayment for it. But I think a better system would be to specify what you would get payment for if you release it, if you allow third parties to then utilize that information in some way to generate custom advertising, for instance, because there is that risk that once you release any sort of information about yourself, how it will be used and by whom will be out of your control. It could lead to some unintended adverse consequences. So those are my thoughts, but I do think technology is compatible with privacy. In terms of encryption, I'm hopeful that this Q star algorithm is actually quite a bit weaker than it has been hyped up to be. That's my inclination, because the kind of encryption that is used generally has been considered to be extremely strong, and it's not likely to be imminently broken. It may be someday through quantum computing, as you've discussed, but I think there would be enough of a ramp up to that technological capability that hopefully alternative methods of encryption would be developed. So that's my somewhat more optimistic take. I don't think we'll be in a global panopticon, and I definitely hope that we will not be. Now, an interesting comment from Stoic Fitness 22: effective accelerationism tries to solution suffering with the understanding new suffering will take its place that requires more solutioning. Well, I think new technologies do also have risks of their own. But on net, we can make the case that with more technological progress, we will have less total suffering.
Besides, you have to imagine that Sisyphus is happy. That's the. It's important that we constantly have new struggle. Like that, nothing about what you said was a bad thing. Like that's exactly what humanity should be doing, is conquering a struggle, coming on to the next struggle. Could be wrong. Sorry.
I think there is value in that. I have a short story called Sisyphus Vindicated about what Sisyphus actually does when he gets sentenced to roll the rock up the mountain, and then this boulder descends and he has to do it over and over again, but he actually takes advantage of the opportunity. So I will share that story as well.
It does sound pretty cool, yeah.
Indeed. Now I want to give the opportunity for our panelists to ask some questions. So Art, Ramon, please go ahead.
Yeah, let me start off with an observation I had back in 2003. Back in 2003, I remember watching videos of the 9/11 Twin Towers, the trade coming down. There was one in particular, this video I saw of a Japanese news station that was, I think, either a helicopter in the air or something to that effect. But the first plane had already hit, and they were filming the second trade tower. And as that second plane came in and hit that second trade tower, there was a UFO like over to the right side of it. And it was just hovering there, this silver oval shaped. As the second plane hit and debris went towards the direction of this UFO, that UFO moved back out of the way so it wouldn't be hit by the debris. Now, this UFO that was sort of towards the right side of the screen, the Japanese news station decided to put their news logo up pretty high on the right side where it would have been the most visible and clear. But that's exactly where they put their news logo. It wasn't at the bottom to the right. It was up high. It's like they intentionally put the logo there to, hide this UFO. And I remember I was able to find this video for several years after that, but now I can't find it. It's nowhere out there. It's been scrubbed. But, this is back 2005, before the UAP of recent history.
Yeah, that's the thing. The idea of a UAP makes perfect sense. I mean, some people would be like, "Oh, UFO, you think it's ET?" But like the idea that the government had, super fast experimental or classified crafts around. I mean, obviously that was the day of a NORAD drill, right? So there's just saying that it's quite plausible what you're saying, even though I think in 2003 they probably wanted to label it like UFO at September 11th to make you sound crazy. Like everything is framed in such a way that it makes you sound like the crazy person because you're bringing up some data point that you have an actual video for, right? Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no worries. And it's like I said, it's been scrubbed from the net. You can no longer find out there. I've talked to other people who are sort of into the conspiracy theory and whatnot and UFOs. No one seems to know this video. It's like only in my head right now. This Japanese news broadcast where they obfuscated the video or the image of the UFO when it would have been perfectly clear. They put the news logo up high on purpose. But yeah, that's, to me, that's an example of how things get scrubbed off the net and they disappear from history, and then they only exist in people's minds for a while, and then eventually it'll disappear from my brain one day. But luckily I've brought it up in this salon, so it's going to last a bit longer on the net. So yeah, that's just my thoughts.
Well, there is the Wayback Machine. Maybe you could find it there if you have the proper search terminology, or if you remember what website it came from and you search for that time frame. I found a lot of interesting content on the Wayback Machine that I remembered, but it had disappeared from the internet because the original website was down. And actually, this has been one of my observations in the 22 years that I have been particularly active online, that initially when you go on the internet, there is this illusion of permanence of content online, but really the content is only as lasting as the people who are willing to maintain it, or the organizations who are willing to maintain it. And actually, small scale content creators who have individual websites or blogs, as long as they're willing to pay for them and as long as they're alive, of course, have greater longevity than some of the content from large social media sites, which could entirely disappear if the organization changes its business plan or goes out of existence. But it's interesting to consider that sometimes the internet is not as ideal a repository of information as it might seem, especially when one is looking at sufficiently large time frames. So, Andreas, what are your thoughts about that, both specifically how one might be able to access content that one remembers seeing but can't find anymore, as well as how do we improve the longevity of content on the internet for decades rather than just a few months or a few years?
It's really cool with AI. They're starting to automate up-resing technologies. I mean, you've even got chips in your new TVs that can turn your 1080p to an 8K signal. So the amount of technology that's going to take old video and trained with new video, it knows exactly what, I mean, this is a person, so it fills in the details of the person's face in 8K from a 300-line video cassette, like one of these old beta tapes, and it's really impressive. They can make something that looks just brand new 35mm film out of a tape that never looked that good in the 70s or the 80s now. So that's awesome. But in terms of lost things, yeah, we're going to see the Berenstain Bear phenomenon, where there's going to be questions about whether or not we remember things this way happening that way. I would say you're probably able to find that if you were to look, because Japanese television is, especially in 2001, all of it would be recorded, right? So there's going to be maybe a 1080i streaming signal, and there's maybe like 20 channels, maybe 10 channels that did news in 2001. So you could probably break it down, and I'd say there's probably like 3 to 4 major Japanese news channels. So if you could kind of remember what that logo's color was, then you could go from there. And then just look for what was streaming that day. The Wayback Machine is amazing. Thank God for archive.org. I love archive.org. Just want to say that. I don't know. But yeah, there's I think the future of AI is going to make it so that we can restore this content. I'm worried that kids don't care. I don't know what we're going to do about like kids these days they can't watch a video that's 24 frames a second because it's too slow. It's adorable. Like, they can't watch a film because it's boring. Like, the idea of just that flickering that slowly. So I don't know what we're going to do necessarily for kids like that. We might have to completely ruin movies like Star Wars was done for us so that kids will appreciate them. But maybe that's also part of what's going to happen is we're going to feed this stuff into AI and make new content that's like the Rugrats in live action as done by Tim Burton. I think that's the future, is that we'll probably regenerate most of our content. Like right now, if I say I can't find a certain painting, I can type in the name of that Renaissance artist and the name of that painting and generate a painting that looks like that painting. That's, I think, even weirder. You know what I mean? Like someone's like, I don't remember the actual painting, but it looks kind of like this. Like that's more savant. So I don't know. I think we're going to get to that point pretty soon too. But also, okay. So this is really what's interesting to me about that idea is post-truth is so much more important than truth itself. And here's why. Like I'm not a big fan of the postmodernism, but I'm realizing it matters. And it's because I am more relevant online than I am in real life. That is to say, more people know my online presence than know my real life personality. That is to say that I am less impactful than this illusional avatar of myself is, right? And even if I'm pretty impactful, like in real life and people know me and love me, I will eventually die and this thing will have reruns. So it's really weird because it's actually not that strange. So many people have done this in history. There have been many. Everyone that we ever remember is one of these. It's a famous person, a royal or something like that. But we're all becoming like that, where it doesn't matter. Like, and we've always wrestled with this. Like, oh, didn't you hear that this artist was really a drunk and a mean guy? You're like, I don't care. I really just like his art. Well, that's how we're going to start addressing post-truth. It's like, well, I don't really care about what really happened with that guy. I just liked his YouTube. I just liked the content that was created. I just liked what they meant to me, what this means to me. And so it's, as much as I hate that idea of postmodernism, it doesn't matter, like, if it was an accident or what, because you saw it, you're relevant, you exist, you matter, and so your whole world and our world, because we're together and you're affecting our world and you're a powerful person, it matters way more than whether or not that ever happened that way. That's the thing about, like, the Berenstain Bear or the Berenstain Bear, right?
It's interesting because, yes, a lot of people have been influenced by, for instance, historical figures who have already been what you described for centuries, like the way we interact with Aristotle or Plato or Socrates, who was actually mediated through Plato, so he didn't write anything down. So our
Stalin was beloved, you know? He washed your boots when you slept, right? Like Stalin, Uncle Joe, right?
Now we have a different Uncle Joe, hopefully a bit more benign than that.
Oh, snap.
But yeah, we've interacted with these figures through essentially selective representations of what they wrote or accounts of their lives. Many writings of Aristotle have been lost. Many of the Socratic dialogues, the actual conversations that he had with people on the streets of Athens, were not recorded. So we don't know what he said. And there may have been other aspects that were missing that could have led us to form a different impression. On the other hand, I don't want to be the kind of person who goes back and cancels historical figures because of perceived transgressions. I don't want to be the kind of person who says, well, this individual didn't lead a life up to our moral standards, or he made some terribly wrong decision somewhere, so we should discount everything he said that might be worthwhile. I think we need to learn from all aspects of history. And I think in terms of ourselves or our contemporaries, we do have the right to kind of curate information about ourselves. And we do have the right to pick and choose information that we think is beneficial about other people. Again, if some person on YouTube provides valuable content, but he ate something for breakfast that I didn't like, I don't need to know what he eats for breakfast. I don't need to fixate on that necessarily.
Unless it's people.
Unless it's people. I mean, there are boundaries. There are some people whose actions are inexcusable. Like, I wouldn't place any credence in any statement by a Hamas member. I just don't see anything that they could say as redeemable.
God, I would try so hard though. Like, now that you say that, it's a challenge accepted. I will try to find something because I think it's important. It's kind of like, I think that because of like Al Qaeda and Taliban making their like cars and their Instagram and Twitter posts and like most people never bothered to ever look at any of that stuff. And now you've got millennials and Zoomers and kids reading the Bin Laden letter, and they're like, oh. Yeah, because if you don't know this stuff and then you see it for the first time, you're freaking shocked. Like every time these kids. So I don't know. I think I agree with you, but I want to stay on the bus a little longer. I'm an accelerationist, right? So I want to stay on the bus until at least they start canceling their biggest here. Like if like they start taking out JFK, I mean, I guess they did, but maybe Martin Luther King or Obama, and then they're like, wait, we're gonna cancel Obama now, or like for some reason that I just want to stay on the bus until they see that, and then I'll get off the bus with you. But
interesting. So with regard to the Bin Laden letter, I haven't read it, but my understanding is I think there's value in trying to discern the true motives of somebody who is an enemy of Western civilization, try to understand what drives them, what their genuine interests are, what their agenda is, and accurately respond to that. So it does us no service to pretend that somebody has motivations that they do not. So if somebody were to say, well, Osama bin Laden attacked the United States because he hates green aliens and he thinks that green aliens are secretly living amongst Americans and he wants to take out the green aliens. Well, clearly that would be an incorrect view of the world. Now, the implication might still be the same, though. Osama bin Laden is an enemy. He needs to be fought. I think it was justified to take him out. And I think there are other enemies whom it is justified to take out. I do think it would help to understand where they're coming from. So in that sense, I don't want to censor content.
But you're also, so my dad was a lawyer and he said, sometimes you don't want to understand crazy people because that makes you sometimes more crazy. So I get where you're coming from on that level. That actually is a logical way to go about it. However, I do think that humanization is really interesting, and maybe I'm not really that sympathetic of a person generally, but like the idea of Barry Soetoro or what's the Osama bin Laden character that he was because he was like a CIA guy with short hair. Have you seen those pictures? And Osama bin Laden did when they found his base, he had a PlayStation and a computer with all of these video games. He loved Final Fantasy. CIA disclosed that he loved Final Fantasy VII. And he loved Counter-Strike. And he played Counter-Strike. So if you ever played Counter-Strike online, you might have played with Osama bin Laden, right? Which is pretty crazy to think about. It's weird when all of a sudden you can start humanizing something. Because it were so assuredly the human, and the other thing is the inhuman, that we're always unanimity minus one, I and thou, and that's a great way they can divide us, and it's a great way they can control us. And I don't really think it works that way, because once you go over there, you start to see, like for instance, in Palestine, there's a ton of Christians, right? So it's not just one, but the Western mind in its trailer park thinking that we have the greatest country on earth, well, like their husbands in prison thinking that they're the most free country on earth. Like America's very strange for the way we look at the rest of the world, and we don't understand that at this point we're a third world country, a second world country actually, kind of worse. But then, okay, and then the last thing I'd say about that is like the Constitution of the Soviet Union is really good on paper, right? So like you can read something and then you can know like in practice probably isn't necessarily the same as it looks on paper. You can lie on paper.
I remember reading the Constitution of the Republic of Belarus during one of my visits there, and it was kind of modeled off of the Soviet Constitution, but I kept pointing out to people, well, look, it says here we're guaranteed freedom of speech, we're guaranteed all sorts of freedoms, even some that weren't in the American Constitution. So
exactly.
Hence, nobody can punish me for what I say, and the people who actually lived in that part of the world for a long time, I think they were just laughing or shaking their head.
They're like laughing but standing back so you don't get hit by lightning, and they don't want to get hit by it with you.
Yes, but it's interesting too. I do see a lot of parallels between contemporary America and the late years of the Soviet Union, the 1970s and the 1980s. Actually, Uncle Joe reminds me a little bit of Brezhnev, I would say.
That's a great comparison, to be perfectly honest. I think that's actually pretty uncanny, and it's super weird, and it makes me always wonder, if, like, how much, again, with, can things really be this accidental? Because it feels so much like the late 70s period with Robert Maxwell, playing, and it just feels yeah, I don't know what's going on anymore. The United States is really just becoming a sustainable social state for an authoritarian world power. Did I get frozen there? Sorry.
No, we can see you. Now, Sergei Gubkin has an interesting comment here. Let me bring it up. Joe Chernenko or Konstantin Biden. Oh, that is funny. That is indeed apropos.
But his son has a joke about him, right? Like, I forget what it is, but it's like it's like the pedo Pete thing. But Pete was from the Tom Clancy novel, right? Isn't there a thing there? Like, there's a character in a Tom Clancy novel who is a Soviet double agent living in Washington, D.C., working as a senator or something like that. And that's the nickname that Hunter Biden gave to his father. So that's always some kind of minor, I mean, of all that's minorly interesting, right?
Yeah, we live in interesting times, to be sure. Now, Jason had a few questions that I want to address. One is a brief one. Do you have a team, Andreas, to help you produce any of your videos?
I mean, I have a community. I definitely make all of my videos myself, so I don't have a team making my videos, but I do have a community. Like, I have a great group of people that I would consider a team. Like, so I have a Discord, I have mods, I have people that are running the group and everything like that. So TechSpread is running my Discord. And yeah, tons of the mods in the YouTube channel as well. But it's just sort of participatorily built itself. There's not like, I don't really have like a company of people that I'm like, I don't have interns, anything like that. I've worked in those circumstances a lot. I like it and all that, but I think somehow I really enjoy having so much of the say over what's happening. And so the AI is cool because I can do so many of the parts. I've always liked that much control. So it's cool. But I'm also interested in working with more people and making more projects, and so I do work with people. I have a friend who's making a film that I'm helping him with. He has a team assembled for that. I know a lot of people that work in film and have their own teams. Me, myself, I just prefer to be as punk rock as possible and try to do it like Trey Parker and Matt Stone, as few people as quickly as possible. I found that that's what's worked for me.
Certainly there is value to having agency and control and being aware.
Artistic freedom, I can see, is a big thing for you, and as well it should be, because you're an artistic master. You're brilliant. So I could see where you would be like, you know what, look, I really want to do this the cool way. Like, I want to do it. And so I get it. That's all.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's how I feel about it.
Yes, indeed. So Jason wonders, if you were brought to a meeting with an alien, what would you ask?
I guess I would probably, it depends on a lot of things. Like, first I would ask, probably the first guttural instinct is like, am I an alien too? I'm sorry, that was my first one. Like, am I related to you? Like, how much am I what you are? And that not just as a joke, literally. Like, I would like to know how much we are similar. But it's, to me, an alien is such a weird term, right? I feel like, you mean undocumented worker. No, but like, it could be, there's so many different kinds of light beings. There's different kinds of, when we say alien, it psychologically means something that's foreign. And I'm not sure that's the right way to look at it, right? It could be that it's something, but something that was completely
Extraterrestrial.
Yeah, something that was completely different.
Extraterrestrial. So not from Earth.
Yeah, but like if it looked kind of like Star Trek, then you'd immediately start trying to talk to it in English. If it looked like a giant squid from Cthulhu monster, you might not even try to talk to it right away, right? Pretty open-minded to like the different kinds of aliens. I would definitely not try to baptize it right away.
Yes, I think I might play at my musical composition based on prime numbers and see if it could discern the logic in that.
So yeah, that's where you would. That's smart. I would start with the what's it called? Final Frontiers? No, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, fourth kind, whichever one.
Yeah, try to figure out some sort of common basis of communication, some framework by which that alien and we would have a common understanding of the world. Now, it's also interesting to note an observation from John H. that Americans have long been brought up to think we're the good guys, we wear the white hats, we don't shoot unless shot at first. It can be startling for people to wake up to the facts of life. And actually, one of the aspects that led me to recognize this was the release of the video known as Collateral Murder through the efforts of Chelsea, then Bradley Manning, and then distributed by WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, where it was shown that American helicopter pilots were actually intentionally attacking civilians in Iraq and expressing some degree of delight over that, which American military forces were not supposed to do. And that definitely changed my own outlook on the virtues of American involvement in Iraq, even looking past the practical failure of that war. But it's interesting also to note that there are some really bad people against whom the United States has fought. And we mentioned one of them, Osama bin Laden. Saddam Hussein was not a good person either, to say the least. And there are various other...
it gets really hard, though, when you're comparing people. It's like, okay, was Saddam Hussein worse than George Bush Sr.? I don't know. I really don't. I'm sorry. And I love America, but I also would have loved to live in Iraq in the 80s. Like, it sounds like it was pretty great in the early 90s in a lot of ways, let's be honest. And what we heard about wood chippers, not true, So that we have to deal with the fact that we live in a propaganda statist illusion still. It's just, that's the thing. I feel like Americans would do so well if they just studied the 80s and 70s USSR, because it's like it's not our first rodeo. This is exactly the same show rebooted. I really, and we're constantly told, oh yeah, well, these people are super evil. Yeah, sure. And these people kill people. Okay, yeah. But so do we, and so do the people. And when we say we, that's also weird, right? Because all of a sudden we're attaching ourselves to the king, and we didn't used to do that. So I think we need to be very careful about saying we're doing those things. Like, I wasn't in Iraq. I know people who were in Iraq, and I thank them. But like, at the same time, I know they suffered a lot of trauma because it was really crazy. So I had a thought about what Jason said, though, also. If I were if I were an alien, and I wanted to communicate with humanity, I would probably take about 100 years to do it, right? You'd study humanity, you'd build some AI into, like, maybe help certain humans get this technology, and then AI would create some sort of a language system that would be the communication system itself, right? Because then you'd have some sort of an intermittent system that would slowly shape their world, assuming that you're so much more advanced than us.
Very interesting. Now, Jason does have a question that is related to the discussion we just had, and I would be curious for you to address it. Obviously, it's a broad question, but what do you think our global policy should be? And again, he uses the we. What do you think the United States global policy should be? Because I agree, there are aspects of current American foreign policy that I completely do not support, and I would not have made those decisions. Likewise, I don't think we should attribute to ourselves the actions of individual American soldiers or generals or politicians who are responsible for atrocities. I don't think they were done by us, even if those individuals claim some sort of authority based on popular mandate. It's still not something we would have done. But what do you think a good global policy for the United States ought to be?
I mean, it's super complicated. Basically, if you were to go with a libertarian or constitutionalist Ron Paul like system in 2008, I was really interested in that. I thought that would be really interesting. But that would collapse the United States supremacy or precedency of America being the sort of number one thing. It's not necessarily the worst thing, but we would then just become like any other country. In fact, we would set a precedent for other countries to not interfere. I mean, that again, that could be a great thing, but it's how realistic is it we live in an anarchy, in a worldwide anarchy. Each sovereignty, each state, Weber defines a state as a legitimate source of violence. They are not underneath a there is no, trying not to sound conspiratorial here, there is no New World Order technically, right? Like, not officially, right? So in this anarchy, sovereignty is very important. I think anarchy is the only way that you can have equality, because you don't actually put someone above and someone below in that sort of system. It's the only way to have any sort of sovereignty or self-determination, is we need to respect anarchy, but we need to look at anarchy from a socially conscious perspective. I think people think of anarchy as being Randist or something like that, which is, why America has kind of allowed for banana republic globalism, these corporations that can go out of the United States, use the United States to use other countries and build up their wealth that they saturate outside of the United States, right? And so now you've got these corporations that have become so much more powerful than any state, and then they're able to abuse and exploit those states. So it's really hard to say, oh, well, America should stop interfering in the foreign policies of other states, because we would just be Americans interfering at that point. Instead of being the country, it would just be corporations that are made by, the Bob Dole company, right? Like the Dole, is that right? Like, so I just feel like we need to have a policy. We can't just be like, we're going to shut our doors and never speak again. As much as I really wish that was some sort of viable, feasible thing. But I think what we should do is we should look at innovation, so trying to have America be, we have in every library, there should be 3D printers, right? Every kind of technology that we can think of should be thrown at the problems, and they should be given to kids, because kids aren't getting paid. There's an investment that's already happening. We can turn that into a viable investment in our future, where they can be making solutions. We can be awarding kids in a way that actually helps their families and their futures out. And so I'm a big fan of technology being used ubiquitously as a global policy, because I think we can set the precedent for the rest of the world to want to, like in the past, a lot of places have tried to follow in our footsteps. If we start building a policy that says we want to study other languages, we encourage other cultures, we end up exactly where our global policy was after the Monroe period, right? Which is where we said we won't allow for other people to interfere in this arena from Europe and from Asia, new colonialists, but we're really not trying to become a colonial power immediately, right? And that very quickly changed because of Roosevelt and a few others who wanted to go to like the Philippines and things like that. So, I mean, that only happened because of the fall of the Portuguese and Spanish colonial power in Philippines. If we hadn't done that, we would have been happy, I think. So we probably should try to keep our mid-late 19th century global policy and return to that.
Yes, I definitely think U.S. foreign policy was superior in the 18th and 19th centuries. I'm reminded by Thomas Jefferson's exhortation for peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. George Washington's admonition to avoid entangling alliances. I think if the United States had adhered to that, we would be in much less of a mess in terms of our current foreign policy commitments. Luis Arroyo writes, a decent global policy would be to cooperate with the world rather than use it for our benefit. I think there is a great aspect of benefit that could be harnessed from cooperation through
both.
trade, through technology, through education, through being a good example.
Yeah, so I would clarify this statement as it's important to have positive reciprocity, right? There's already reciprocity happening everywhere, and there's a lot of negative reciprocity or neutral reciprocity, which is pretty close to negative, where someone doesn't even realize they're being exploited. But there's a lot of negative reciprocity. If we could turn, and we can, all reciprocity to positive reciprocity, then everyone would benefit in every circumstance. I think that's really reasonable with the technology of creativity we have. We can take all the data, we can figure out ways to make sure that everyone has positive reciprocity.
Yes, indeed. And hopefully we will be able to achieve such a world despite the many obstacles that the current turbulent times we live in put in our way. Now,
well, it does say something, though. I just want to say that with the transhumanist party suggests returning to 19th century policies. It says a lot. That that some things are just true, right? Some things are objectively good, and also we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's not that science fiction. We're actually just talking about returning to that tradition.
Yes, and Alan points out seeking win-win solutions is a good policy, and it was accessible through rational thinking of people in technologically less advanced eras than our own. So speaking of the U.S. Transhumanist Party and its prospects, Alan wonders, in your opinion, how do we most effectively get the USTP messages out during the upcoming election year? So we have our campaign with Tom Ross as our presidential candidate, Daniel here as our vice presidential candidate, and we've had a little bit of media exposure thus far. Tom has been featured in a few articles. He has been a guest on various shows. Daniel has done some outreach as well, but we need several orders of magnitude more impact to really make a difference this election season. So how would you suggest we go about doing that?
I like what you guys are doing in terms of talking to people directly, because you can make a huge difference in the right social niches. If you're talking to people that actually can get your entire message and hear it, this is a great way to go about it. I would say also just looking, I mean, I've said earlier kind of as a joke, but I mean it, is the propaganda thing. If you guys had music videos, which now with this AI and stuff, and the new posters that you guys had, I honestly think some of those AI generated posters you have on the transhumanist candidates page are really compelling, and a lot of that stuff is really amazing how a meme can get out there and spread. Being funny and being weird and being musical and all that stuff is totally okay. I know we're trying to do something that's really serious, and that's really important. But you look at the DNC and the GOP; they have musical guests and they have that kind of thing as well. Trying to associate with people that are interested in hypnotic, catchy music, is a way that the DNC has always, had an edge, a competitive edge. So I think having musicians and having people that trying to appeal to artists that can kind of just seed a little bit of this idea into people's mind, that's really huge. And again, it's not just about winning the election, because it's about changing the consciousness. As soon as you guys get this information to be heard by a few of these other politicians, then they're compelled to have to speak on those issues, right? And that's actually a really big deal. It might take a couple of general elections, to get to the point where it's at its big. It's just accepted. People know the word, but eventually it's going to become household terminology because of that. So you're not doing anything wrong by being consistent and by having dedication and perseverance. And I think, just keep doing this.
Yes, well, we definitely shall keep doing this and continue to expand our reach, try to generate some creative content maybe even some music videos, but certainly utilizing the capabilities of AI art and Tom's graphic design skills, which are considerable. So thank you very much. And for those who are interested, please take a look at our candidate profiles page where some of the posters that Andreas mentioned are featured. Now, I wanted to give Daniel the opportunity to ask a question. We have about 6 minutes left in our salon today. So, Daniel, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by the accelerationist philosophy. Can you give like a couple sentence description of what accelerationism is?
I guess it depends on who you ask. Some people say it's eschatology. You know, some people think you're just trying to get to the apocalypse. I really think of it more like you're trying to run through the season, right? Because you get to a certain point where you're at the end of the season and there's the new season is coming, and things are on this sort of cyclical nature. So I don't really think of it as like the apocalypse, the end of the world, but I do think that we do see the husk of the system, right? It gets to a point where the knowable Tao is not the eternal Tao, and we've just got this husk of what was happening, and we're holding on to that, and it's very brittle. And as a child, I was born into the San Andreas earthquake. So I grew up in Santa Cruz right around the difference of 1890s buildings to geodesic domes and inflatable, just whatever they could put up after the earthquake knocked the entire town down. They had this very Burning Man, futuristic Martian colony that I was like, this is normal, right? So to me, I think that we should constantly embrace the change as much as possible. We should protect that, hold fast to what is true. You know, we should try to keep what we care about. We shouldn't just destroy things for fun. But we do. We live in a world that has some degradability to it. And it's really kind of nice that things are degradable, that we can replace them with new things. So, yeah, the idea that people are afraid of accelerationism is kind of Atlas Shrugged. Right? This idea that this guy invents the solution in a world that is no longer able to live up to its system. The system has worked for a long time, but now it's depleted the resources and it has to change. This guy comes up with a solution, but then that solution is suppressed, right? And so for a lot of people, they say that accelerationism is just let all these people lose their money, let these big corporations fail, because a solution is a disruptive technology. And I'm not saying that from the most cynical perspective, but it is true. I mean, let's be real, that disruptive technologies can get rid of the social control mechanisms. And we look at oil companies, and I was just thinking earlier today about in California why I can't take a train yet. And it's been 100 years, almost, like 80, 90 years since they tore out the trains because they were afraid the Japanese were going to bomb California or land in California and just use the trains to get everywhere, allegedly. I don't think this is necessarily true. But this is the story they used to get rid of the trains. And we don't have public infrastructure still to this day for like 80 years. We do in the sense that we have oil companies that replaced these train conglomerates. But how did that happen? Like, how did the train billionaires get replaced by the Standard Oil billionaires? It has to do with the international trade. So I think accelerationism, it's the only way to escape these systems of control, and that's why I'm okay with it. Even though I can see that people get hurt, I think people get hurt no matter what, and it's kind of like accelerationism you can think of in India. You know, there's a certain point when they brought in this crane. And all of a sudden, it was just lifting in 24 hours what a boat, it took almost a month for people to empty this boat. And now in 24 hours, it could just do the whole thing. He had thousands of people put out of work. Thousands of people that are no longer able to carry salt bags over their shoulder, hunched over, while they get older, right? And now they're programmers, and they're literally not a single one of them wishes that they were lifting a salt bag. You know what I mean? So accelerationism doesn't have to be this horrible thing like we're told. It actually could be just embracing the future, being ready for change, and being independent of your system, so that even if everything does fall apart, I can go outside. If I lose my TV, I'm not that worried about it. I'll go sit in the woods. I mean, or I will get, if there's a snowstorm, I think that's like the situation where people really want to have some dependability that they will not die. That's why I do understand. We don't want to just destroy everything. We don't want to just lose everything. But in fact, it's that noble doubt. We want to keep doing what we did before, creating systems that work for the situation at hand. We have to be relevant. We have to be topical and contemporaneous.
I would also endorse people look into possibilianism, which is the idea of just being open to all possibilities that even aren't in front of you. But I know
possibilianism. I love that. I'm writing that down. Possibilianism.
Yeah, it's a great.
Thank you.
Invented by David Eagleman, I think, the neurophysicist.
Sweet.
Was championing that. But yeah, we're running out of time. Alan, I guess you should have some input here.
You're muted, Alan. But I will say, before you unmute yourself, while you're unmuting yourself, that your facial reactions, I live for them. This whole podcast.
Yeah, verbally is not the only way to communicate. That's true. I really like everything you've said and presented today. It's an interesting perspective to look at the world through the lens of social media only, and it's unfortunate. I think that what was the idea? I don't know, remember what you called it, but this idea that people are much larger in this social media realm than they are in real life, and it's an amplification of a person, but it's also an abstraction of one. And I think that's an amazing kind of view of the world. I don't know how we're going to leverage that for the USTP going forward with our candidates and our message, but I sure hope we can figure that out. Also, if you've got any comments on how to curate your own, one's own feed and cut through the clutter, please pass on those.
So the answer to that's simple, by the way. I wish I said it at the beginning. I no longer use Google or any of these search engines. I don't use DuckDuckGo even. I just use ChatGPT or Bard or hopefully very soon Grok. So I ask it a question, it cuts through all the advertisements, right? And it gets you the information you want assembled in an essay. You can be like, break this down chapter by chapter, tell me what's going on here. And I'm finding, granted, that's going to be dangerous because you'll have to be sure to really read the sources and stuff. It'd be just the same as Wikipedia, though. But at the end of the day, I'm getting far more direct information this way because it just goes, it doesn't care if something's on page 9 or 900. It just knows that this is relevant information, and it assembles like this is the history of what happened on Thursday in Warsaw, 1986, whatever. Like it can do anything. You can ask it to rewrite this to tell me from the perspective of the other side. Like, what were they saying in the war from the other side? And we'll get articles and everything. So yeah, Bard and ChatGPT and Grok replace search engines. I say that's immediate.
Yeah, Bard and ChatGPT. Very interesting recommendation here and great insights today. Thank you very much, Andreas, for joining us. Unfortunately, our time for this salon has come to an end, but we really appreciate all of your contributions, and to everyone, live long and prosper.
Thanks for